This is Whitechapel in Liverpool city centre, and to the left of me is Button Street. And this is a statue of Beatles manager Brian Epstein. It depicts him walking towards his old shop, Nems. The statue was sculpted by Andy Edwards, the same guy who did the 4 Beatles down at the waterfront. And it's pretty recent, it was put here in August last year, August 2022. This is Stanley Street, and this is Wong's. I think they were jewellers, and this used to be the location of Frank Hesse's music centre, and that's where the Beatles and many other musicians in Liverpool used to buy their instruments, including me, although I wasn't really a musician. So this is Stanley Street, and we're going to have a wander up to have a look at the statue of Eleanor Rigby. So the Eleanor Rigby statue was sculpted by quite a famous singer entertainer called Tommy Steele, and it's recently been renovated, cleaned up and put back in its place. It's dedicated to all the lonely people, which isn't me today because I brought my wife. I said I was going for a drink in the Cavern, so she decided that she'd come. Anyway, the statue is just on the right hand side there, so we're going to cross the road and have a look. So this statue arrived here in 1982, and it's a prime location for people who want to photograph. They sit next to her, and it's a little memento of being to Liverpool, I guess. And this is a photograph I took of it. And this is the most famous street on earth, Mathew Street. Can you think of a more famous street? No, thought not. This is Derek's Cafe. So this is Mathew Street, and it connects Stanley Street, where we've just been, to North John Street at the other end. Originally, this street was called Mathew Pluckington Street, and it was changed to what it is today, simply Mathew Street. Mathew Pluckington is described as a famous merchant. This street was once lined with warehouses on either side, pretty much like the warehouses on the right hand side today. These days, Mathew Street is really just a tourist attraction. It caters for people who are interested in the Beatles and have come here for a holiday or a couple of days in Liverpool, and they have the photographs taken in the various locations dedicated to the Beatles. Well, this video is going to be about 3 things. It's going to be about the Cavern Club, Eric's, which was another music venue on this street, and still is, and also about the street itself. Now on the left hand side here we're coming up to the statue of Cilla Black. This statue is a collaboration between Andy Edwards and Emma Rogers, and it's been here since 2017. It stands outside the original entrance to the Cavern Club. So just behind Cilla is a plaque marking the original entrance and some photographs of what was here then, and also a photograph of the bouncer or doorman Paddy Delaney. Known as a gentle giant, he began work here in 1959 and continued through all the Merseybeat years. And here's what the steps look like. Just over the road from the Cavern is Eric's. The guy who used to book the bands for Liverpool Stadium, Roger Eagle, left to open this club, Eric's, with his friend Ken Testy. They were later joined by Pete Fulwell, who owned a record label. Eric's opened on the 1st of October 1976. The club played host to local bands, but also some national and international bands as well. But basically they catered for punk rock and new wave. Eric's was a members only club. Members bought a yearly membership, but they also let under 18s in as well to their matinee shows in the afternoons. The club lasted around about 4 years. It closed in March 1980 after being raided by the police for drugs. The final acts that night were the Psychedelic Furs and Peter Wiley's War Heat. Peter Wiley being a local musician. Apart from the photographs I've featured here, pretty much everybody in the punk scene played here. Elvis Costello, the Buzzcocks, Joy Division, Sex Pistols, Susie and the Banshees, the Slits, Talking Heads, the Stranglers, Ultravox, Wire, XTC, X-Ray Specs. Everybody. In October 2011, a new venue called Eric's Live was opened by a local Liverpool business person. This venture didn't last too long and it soon closed, but Eric's reopened under new management in its original venue, and it's still there today, and it's gone back to what it used to be, a venue for local artists to perform and also some from further afield. Now, back in the day when this street was called Mathew Street, the warehouses on either side were used to store vegetables. Somewhere along the line they were owned by railway companies and eventually fell into the ownership of British Rail. Now, you would probably think that with all the interest in the Beatles and where they lived, where they came from, where they played back in the early days, that this street would have been preserved and kept as a tourist attraction, a monument to the Beatles since their inception. But that's not actually the case, because in 1973 somebody at British Rail decided that they needed to install a ventilation shaft to serve the underground railway which runs under here, and to do this they decided to pull down the cavern, and it became a parking lot. The irony in this chapter of Mathew Street's life is that the ventilation shaft was never installed, and the whole demolition of the cavern on that side of the road was pointless. Now, this photograph shows Mathew Street when the cavern was actually open, and you can see that there's been some demolition even back then. You know, and sometimes people leave comments on videos I make about Liverpool, and they say, was Liverpool better then or better now? And when you look at photographs like that, well, it really does make you think. My opinion would be that Mathew Street is a lot better now than it was back then, and that photograph probably dates from the late 1950s, early 1960s, and I think although this place has turned into a tourist attraction, it's a lot nicer than it was back then. Four Lads Who Shook the World is a statue by sculptor Arthur Dooley, and it shows the four Beatles here. Three of them are held in, I guess this is an angel, so that's John, George and Ringo there, and to the right hand side at the bottom is Paul, and I would say Paul's a cherub, but apparently, according to Arthur Dooley, it's a figure with wings, because that's what Paul McCartney apparently did. He left the Beatles to form Wings. Anyway, we're now at the North John Street end of Mathew Street. When I started nightclubbing at the tender age of 16, an underage clubber, I'm afraid, this is where the Cavern used to be, and it's marked there as the Cavern Pub. But in 1974, when I started clubbing, that was the Cavern. They'd moved from one side of the road to the other. So the Cavern you would visit today is opposite that. And this is the Wall of Fame, and these bricks here have various bands and musicians' names, and these are all the bands and musicians who played here over the years. Now this statue is John Lennon, and I'll give you my opinion. I don't really think that this looks like John Lennon, but apparently they lost the original head, and this was a different head which they put on the statue. Anyway, people come here from all over the place to have their photographs taken with it, as you can see here. Okay, so let's have a look at the history of the Cavern Club. The Cavern Club opened in a warehouse cellar at number 10 Mathew Street on Wednesday the 16th of January 1957. It was owned by Alan Steiner, and he named it after a jazz club in Paris, and he wanted it to be the top jazz venue outside of London. Top of the bill on the opening night was the Merseysippy Jazz Band, supported by Wall City Jazzmen, Ralph Watmo Jazz Band and the Coney Island Skiffle Group. 600 jazz fans crammed inside, and hundreds more queued in Mathew Street outside, hoping to get into the club. In March 1957, American blues legend Big Bill Bruesney, never heard of him to be honest, I think if it was a legend I probably would. Anyway, he performed at the Cavern Club as part of his European tour. He's the first of a succession of legendary blues artists to perform at the club. Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Maureen Knight, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee and many others. All legends. Anyway, in July, somebody we have heard of actually played here. Richard Starkey, obviously later known as Ringo Starr, is thought to have made his debut at the Cavern Club playing drums with the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group. Skiffle, the folk music style with a rock and roll influence, was played by teenage groups using cheap guitars and domestic utensils. Washing boards were quite popular back then, I believe. The skiffle craze started in 1956 when British skiffle king Lonnie Donegan of My Old Man's a Dustman fame released the single Rock Island Line. Now on the 7th of August 1957, that's 4 days after my birthday, 4 days after I arrived in Liverpool, the Quarrymen, who were a skiffle group, made their first advertised appearance at the Cavern Club. Band members included John Lennon, Len Garry, Rod Davis, Colin Hanton, Pete Shotton and Eric Griffiths. During the performance, Alan Steiner told John Lennon to cut out the rock music. Now a little jump to the 24th of January 1958, and Paul McCartney makes his debut at the Cavern Club as a member of the Quarrymen. Paul joined the Quarrymen in October 1957. Let's take a little jump to the 1960s, and in the January of 1960 the Cavern hosted Liverpool's first jazz festival. But in May, the first advertised beat night session at the Cavern Club was opened by Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, with Ringo Starr on drums. Little did they know they were striking the first chord for the most exciting period in rock and roll history. The new sound, with imported US influences, had a distinctive Liverpool style and was christened Merseybeat. Thursday the 9th of February 1961 saw the Beatles' first performance at the Cavern Club, which featured John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Stuart Sutcliffe on bass and Pete Best on drums. On Thursday the 9th of November 1961, Liverpool businessman Brian Epstein, whose family owned the nearby record store Nems, visited the Cavern Club for a lunchtime session and saw his first performance by the Beatles. Brian Epstein offered to become the band's manager, and by June 1962 had secured a recording contract with them for Parlophone Records. On Sunday the 19th of August 1962, Ringo Starr appeared at the Cavern Club as the Beatles' new drummer. Pete Best had played his last gig with the Beatles on the 15th of August. Now Saturday the 3rd of August 1963 marked the last of 292 performances at the Cavern Club by the Beatles. It was also my 6th birthday as well. I remember it well. Okay, so let's move into the 1970s, and 1972 British Rail took ownership of the warehouse block numbers 8 to 12 Mathew Street, which housed the original 1957 cellar vaults of the Cavern Club. The extended cellar area Ray McFall had created in 1964 to provide the space for the Cavern Sounds recording studios, plus the ground floor extensions made for the reopening in 1966. The plan by British Rail was to clear that part of Mathew Street and build a ventilation shaft for the city's new underground railway loop, which I mentioned earlier in the video. So in May 1973, the 27th of May actually, the Cavern Club closed and reopened in a new premises at number 5 to 15 Mathew Street, which I showed you earlier. That's the one with the Wall of Fame. So on Tuesday, the 5th of June 1973, bulldozers moved in to start the demolition of the warehouse buildings that housed the Cavern in Mathew Street. Although the buildings at street level were demolished, the original cellar was not destroyed and only filled in with rubble from the building above. And as I said, the proposed ventilation shaft was never built, and the site became a rough surface street level storage area for British Rail vehicles before becoming a car park. March 1976, the Cavern Club at number 7 to 15 Mathew Street changed its name to the Revolution Club and hosted a music appreciation club called Eric's. Unfortunately, this didn't help to improve trade, and the revolution closed on the 14th of April 1976. On the 1st of October 1976, the venue at 7 to 15 Mathew Street reopened as Eric's, and that's a club I've covered earlier. So let's move on to the 1980s. On the 9th of December 1980, Britain woke up to the news that John Lennon had been shot dead in New York. In Liverpool, Day's fans gathered at the Mathew Street site and outside the original Cavern Club to mourn the loss and leave messages of condolence. On the 7th of December 1981, plans were revealed to excavate the buried remains of the Cavern Club cellar. It would form part of a £7 million redevelopment project of the former warehouse site at 8 to 12 Mathew Street, which had housed the Cavern Club up until its closure in 1973. On the 26th of April 1984, a new beginning with the reopening of the Cavern Club and Cavern Walk shopping centre with offices above. The landlord's Royal Life Insurance leased the club to former Liverpool Football Club player Tommy Smith and his business partner George Downey. The authentic reconstruction of the Cavern Club was below ground level and included a bar, restaurant and memorabilia shop. There's lots more to the history of the Cavern Club, but I'm going to leave it here because it would go on and on and on and on and on, and the video would be just too long to watch. So this is the current entrance to the Cavern Club, and I'm going to kill the live sound because I feel, because they're playing music and live music, there's actually a guy playing guitar here, I think I might get a copyright strike. So I'm going to play some ambient music just to fill in. Okay, so you can see we've come down around about 4 flights of stairs to get to this level, and this is the bar at the Cavern Club. I actually ordered Cavern Club's own lager, which seemed quite nice, although I'm no expert on lagers, but it's quite a nice space. I never actually went to the original Cavern. I wasn't old enough, as I've said. It closed in 1973, and I only started looking old enough to drink around about 1974. But this is supposed to replicate a great deal of what the club was like. This actual area wasn't demolished, so it should be pretty much as is, and what was rebuilt with the original bricks, I believe. So that's where we've just come from. That's the way out and the way in. As I said earlier, the Cavern closed on the 27th of May 1973, and the last major recording artist to perform here was Susie Quattro, and she played on the 2nd of November 1972. Now, other bands who made it big in the 1970s, Status Quo played here on the 9th of February 1970. There's a story about their road manager and harmonica player Bob Young, and he said it was very difficult to get the equipment in and out of the Cavern, but they really enjoyed playing here, mainly because the Beatles had played here in the past. They were really happy to have played on the same stage as the Beatles had. Also, Queen played here on the 31st of October 1970. Freddie Mercury had been living in rented accommodation in Penny Lane and had joined a local rock band called Ibex. I think they came from Halewood. I seem to remember them being a Halewood-based band. He left Ibex in late 1969 to join Brian May and Roger Taylor after an impromptu performance with them at a Liverpool venue called The Sink. Don't remember that one, probably before my time. Now don't quote me on this, but I think if you go on the Beatles bus tour, you end up back at the Cavern. I think the trip into the Cavern is included in the price. But don't quote me on that, and if they say that's not true, I'm not going to give you a refund. But if you do venture in here on your own, without going on the bus, there's Queen there. If you do venture in here, there's a £5 fee on the door to come down the steps, and that basically pays for the live music. So if you come as a couple, it's £5 each, and they do serve food as well, which is I've not tried it, but it looks to be okay. And that £5 fee, of course, is true today, which is September 2023. So if you come next year and it's £45, don't blame me. I don't get anything from them. No kickbacks. One of my favourite singers played here not so long ago. Paul Rodgers, who was the singer in Free and Bad Company, and later did a stint with Queen. He played here on the 8th of June 2000, and he said it was his favourite club gig in 30 years of performing. For so many big names, the size of the audience and the fee is incidental. I think pretty much every musician and every band that I like had a liking for the Beatles. I think they were a huge influence on a lot of performers from back then, people starting out in the late 60s, as Paul Rodgers did. Free began in 1968, and obviously the Beatles were a huge influence for him. Right, so we're going to make our way back up the flights of stairs and make our way back onto Mathew Street. Funny how going upstairs is always a much more difficult task than going down them. Okay, so we're back in daylight once again. So thank you very much for watching, and as always, we'll catch up soon.
J'ai rattrapé le nombre de calories.